Welcome to Grow with Purpose. I'm here with Cameron Earhart on episode 3, covering our business exits series. So, welcome back, Cameron.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So, first episode, we talked about before you start talking to buyers. Second episode, we talked about the financial side of it and getting a quality of earnings report and making sure that you understand what your valuation is going to be based on and how to defend it. Today, we're going to get into due diligence, diligence readiness, and what you've called risk and deal survivability, which,
Sounds fun.
yeah, people who've been through a deal know exactly what that means. People who haven't are probably like, really? That sounds kind of dramatic, but we're going to get into all of it. When we talk about this, the worst case scenario is a deal, a company gets into. They go to market, they get an LOI, they get into due diligence, which means people start the buyers asking lots of questions. They really need to understand what they're buying. And the worst case scenario, the deal falls apart after they get into it. And that happens quite a bit. It's very common. So why do so many of these deals fall apart so late in the process?
Yeah, I really need to do a better job at memorizing the stats that EPI gives us. But every episode, I'm like, I think it's around 60% of deals fall through during due diligence.
Wow.
So extremely common. And just to back up of like, okay, well, what exactly is due diligence? Don't want to assume everybody listening knows what it is. But if you were to go to market in the sense of, hey, you're ready to sell your company, and so maybe you hire a sell-side broker who is going to get your marketing material for your company out to a bunch of potential buyers. Those potential buyers are going to look at your marketing material, and then if they're interested, they're going to submit an offer. That offer is going to come through the form of an LOI, letter of intent. And so you may, receive 5, 6, 7, who knows, however many LOIs to choose from. Those LOIs are going to have the valuation, and then they're also going to have the terms that will eventually lead to the purchase agreement. Not all the terms, but the main ones, the overarching legal ones. And so then you agree to the LOI and you sign it. And when you go under LOI, you go into this period of exclusivity where you can't talk to any other potential buyers, and this period of due diligence. And this period of due diligence is where this buyer is going to come in and they are going to unturn every single stone. They are going to look for every potential issue, risk, problem, whatever it may be in your company, rightfully so, because they're about to spend a lot of money on your business and they want to know exactly what they're purchasing. But they are going to strip you naked and they're going to look for every little thing that might be viewed as a risk. And so understanding, hey, due diligence, the more sophisticated the buyer, the tougher due diligence is going to be. And understanding what you're going into and then just being as prepared as possible so that due diligence doesn't destroy you and the deal fall through is incredibly important. So that's why we use words like survivability, but that's why this episode is important, so that you understand what you're about to step into if you do go under an LOI.
Yeah, and we've had clients go through this, and we try to prepare them for due diligence. And one of our clients who's doing this, he sent me a picture of him having signed the LOI, and he had a big smile on his face, and we both said, well, I hope he feels that way once we're 30 days into due diligence. And I think he might have a little bit harder time remembering that smile, but success, right? So I mean, it's worth it if you're prepared. So like, go back and listen to the first 2 episodes, because that work had been done. And due diligence, as arduous and sometimes frustrating, or it just wears you out, So, but I kind of want to go back to the question: do the deals fall apart late because they didn't do the preparation? Do the deals fall apart, or are there other reasons so many deals fall apart in due diligence? Is it just that like 60 or 70% of the businesses never did the prep work we talked about in episodes 1 and 2? Or are there situations that even with the prep, there's something about it, about a particular seller, about a particular buyer, that can cause deals to fall apart?
I mean, I heard this saying once, I think it's true. They will always find something
Mhm.
that you're not aware of, something, and you might think like, no, I know my business inside out. There's nothing they could find that I'm not aware of. I think it's true. They'll find something and you'll be like, oh, shoot, I forgot about that, or I
Mhm.
didn't know about that. How did they find that? And so I think what happens is there's just something gets discovered. There's some risk that shows up, and it could just it could extend the process. It could change the process, right? There's a curveball that gets thrown, and it's how do both sides react?
Mm.
And so if the buyer recognizes this curveball, they see this curveball, and their response might be, hey, we're gonna have to go back to the table on your valuation. We don't know that we could pay the same amount as before because that now there's this big risk that we're aware of. And the seller, if they're like, well, no way, like I'm not, I don't care. I don't care about that risk. Like that shouldn't affect the valuation, right? And they're being inconsiderate, like they're just not um, being reasonable, rather. Then all of a sudden you get a deal that starts falling apart. Another instance of how a deal can just crash and burn in the process is the buyer will send a request list, and that request list will be hundreds of items. And if you don't have someone, a sell side broker, facilitating that and helping with that and organizing it and communicating, and you're trying to do that on your own, and you're also trying to run your company at the same time, and they're asking for stuff from 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago, and you have no clue where to find it. And so you're like, well, I got to run my company. So sorry, I can't get that to you.
Mhm.
And the buyer's like, well, I need it. Like we're gonna have to see it sooner or later. Then all of a sudden you had a due diligence phase that was supposed to be 90 days. I was talking to a private equity guy the other day, and he was like, we've had this company under due diligence for 9 months. We were supposed to close in 90 days,
Wow.
and they've been under due diligence for 9 months, and we don't know that it's going to close within a year because they're not getting the stuff to us that we need. And so we can't give them a purchase agreement until we find out if there's risk here. So, I mean, there's a number of ways it can happen, but the risk and the deal fatigue, I would say, are probably two of the most common ones.
Yeah, that term deal fatigue is one of the it's a technical term that's particular to, this type of work, but it's also one of those terms that when you say it, everybody gets it, right? Deal
Yeah.
fatigue. It's
Right.
like, ugh. And there's a sense where eventually you can just get to the straw that breaks the camel's back, where it's like the 15th request, for items 81, 96, 105 through 120, right? And it's just like or the potential buyer is kind of like, there's other opportunities in the market, and we can deploy this capital somewhere else. I think we're
Right.
just going to
Yeah.
let this one go, and so the other thing you were saying, and I was thinking to myself, is Cameron saying that the average CEO is not like super organized and super detail oriented and loves to respond to all these lengthy? No, they're not. Like, these are not the people. They didn't build this company by answering, list after list of questions. They built the company by going out and taking action and addressing the most critical thing to clear the bottleneck and figure out ways to overcome problems. And so it's a skill set that's a little bit outside the norm for them to slow down, be patient, read the fine print, go back, dig through the files, review it before you send it over. So if you've got somebody, if you're going it alone, that's all on you. If you've got somebody who's helping you out, it's kind of like, well, there's the file room or there's the server, go work with Kathy and see if you guys can find what they're looking for. I got our company to run. And I think the other thing that I've experienced is that list comes over and you look at it the first time and you're like, oh my gosh, like
Yeah.
I don't even know if we can get this kind of report out of our system. I've never seen anything like this. And you're like sweating it. You're like, I don't, maybe should we try? Should we call our software company, see if they could write a special report? And, if you work with these groups quite a bit, we've had these experiences where we call them, you're like, I don't think we can even get that. Like, that's not something that exists in QuickBooks or, whatever situation they have. And they go, okay, well, let's hold off on that for now. we might be able to do without that. Let's just see,
Yeah.
right? And so we kind of tabled that one for a while, and that happens a lot. But to an owner, that can be very frustrating to get a list of things that you physically have no idea how you're going to come up with that information, and
Yeah.
it can be discouraging.
Yeah.
When we talk about the owner, right? So this is a person who wants to sell their business, but like you just said, their day job is running the business. So when we talk about the owner, we need to talk about the dependency of the business on the owner and other key people. Maybe the owner's got family members in there that aren't going to stick around. Maybe there's key employees who are close to retirement and they've said, hey, when the owner goes, I go. What forms of owner dependence do the buyers really worry about the most? Which ones are the ones that they kind of know this happens all the time? What are the ones that don't necessarily happen all the time, but if they're present in your situation, like you're going to have that conversation.
Right. Yeah. And the type of buyer, there's different impacts here. So if you have a strategic buyer they're looking to acquire and they want you out of the business. And so they're like, day one, you're out. Like they're going to need to know that this company is as undependent, or what's the word I'm looking for? Independent. There it is. Independent of you as possible. Because if it's not, and they're kicking you out and the business falls apart, obviously they just wasted millions of dollars. So if you have a financial buyer and they're saying, hey, we want to keep you around for 3 to 5 years, they might not be as concerned, but it's still a major question. Because they might say, hey, we'll have time. We'll have 3 to 5 years where we could figure this out. We can put the right people in place, the right systems, processes, et cetera. We'll be able to figure this out. But they're still, if they're viewing the company, if it's so founder focused in the sense of it's dependent on the founder for sales relationships, for operational decision making, right? Let's say the org chart is just extremely flat. And so there's no layers of management. It's just everything goes to the business owner. If all the vendors or customers have extremely close relationships with the business owner, and just like all the institutional knowledge is stored in the business owner's head, if they're getting these indications, then they realize, hey, if you leave, if you get your millions of dollars and leave, even if you say you're not going to, the business leaves with you. Everything that we're buying leaves with you. So we need to know that we can take you out of the equation, whether you're going to stay on or not, and that the business is still worth what we're paying for it. And if they deem that it's not, this business owner is responsible for XYZ, that's going to hurt your valuation. And it's also going to potentially crush you in due diligence, whether they just retrade until it doesn't work out, or maybe they decide, hey, this isn't worth it at all. We need to go find a business that isn't dependent on the owner.
Yeah. So a lot of what you just talked about, if it's not dependent on the owner, and hopefully it's not dependent on any, one singular employee. Well, now we start getting into, well, what are the systems? What are the standard operating procedures? What are the processes in the business that enable like the owner to step away? So why do buyers care so much about SOPs and systems? I get it from the owner dependent standpoint, but it always seems like that is a very high value add. It's got to be more than just dependence on the owner. Why do they care so much about the SOPs and the systems?
I think one of the main reasons is it eliminates this centralized institutional knowledge issue where it's, hey, if the business owner goes away, how do we run the company? So it's the playbook on how to run the company. And if they have that playbook, if it's documented and they know like, hey, these are up to date, these are being followed throughout the company, then it's reducing risk in the sense of, well, if something happens to that person, we can just go hire someone else and plug them in and hand them the playbook and train them, and there you go. But if we don't have that and that person leaves, no matter who it is, business owner or anyone, and it's just that knowledge of those system processes live in that person's head, then when they leave, we're gonna have to figure it out from scratch. So they're gonna look for standard, written, documented SOPs and functioning ones and solid systems and sales and marketing throughout operations, service delivery, and finance and reporting and HR and hiring, like really throughout the company. So this should be one of the, we preach this to all of our clients, one of the foundational elements of a healthy business. Do we have standard documented systems and processes that are being used throughout the company? Is there a playbook to run this company, or does it live in everyone's head?
You used two words there. You said documented, and then you kind of supplemented that or added onto it. You said and functioning ones. What's the difference between documented and functioning in your mind?
Well, I've gone into class before where they have an SOP playbook, and you open it up, and it's like the SOP is from 2002, and
Documented,
it,
check. Yeah, we
right,
documented it. Yeah.
we got it documented. So so by functional, I mean, like, are they continually being updated as things change? Because obviously the environment is going to continually change, and so our process, our systems are going to change over time, and so they need to be continually updated. So that's one, are they up to date? But then two, are they being used throughout the company? Everyone who is using that process, are they aware of that process? Are they trained in that process? And are they following the same process? It could be documented, but then you have Tom and Sally who are doing two completely different processes. It's not even the documented one. It doesn't matter that we have a documented one, because Tom and Sally are doing their own thing. So are Tom and Sally doing the same process that is written down, that's documented? If so, then we have a functional process.
Yeah. It's interesting too. Hopefully there's crossover in all three of these episodes. But in the prior episode, when we were talking about valuations, and we are talking about, the impact of a growth rate on a valuation. Well, if there's been a track record of 25, 30, 40, 50, 80% growth, right, over the preceding years, and now this business owner's like, I'm ready to get out. Like, this is the time. We're on this great upward track. Well, they didn't get there without having functioning standard processes. That's how they scaled that business, right? So it's like, well, we think the market, there's more market share to have out there. We need another salesperson. Great. Hire the salesperson, plug them into the training program. In 6 weeks, they're out there selling. They've got all the resources. There's never a question about which contract to use or which price book is the right one. All that stuff is updated every month. There's a process for that. If we need to put a new crew in the field, there's a process for buying the truck, for getting it outfitted, for assigning the crew, for setting up their tablets, for hiring them, for their daily logs and accountability metrics and revenue per route, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Those businesses that have demonstrated that are cashing out on the work that they've done in an exit. But the businesses that maybe they have been plodding along in their consistent growth, and they are attractive to a buyer because there's tremendous upside. Well, if you've got the documented systems and processes, it just makes that upside much more achievable for the prospective purchaser. They're looking at this transaction saying, we're going to buy this asset, this business. And there's two ways that we can essentially make money on this. We can continue to let this business do what it's doing, and it'll grow at probably what it's been growing at, and we'll get the returns from that. And hopefully we paid less than the total returns that we're going to get. We're going to make money. The other option is we can buy this business. We've invested in this asset. Now we can pour additional money, additional capital into this business, and it's going to run through those scalable systems and processes and generate even more returns out the other side. So when we're talking about systems and processes, it's great at putting a potential buyer's at ease about risk and not being too dependent on one person. It also can get them tremendously excited about the growth potential, and it can help you in everything's a trade-off, right? Like, they're tremendously excited about the systems and processes. They're a little worried about the fact that our sales manager is talking about retirement in 2 years, right? And he's driving the sales, but but we're still excited about this over here. So maybe we can overcome that. But if both those things, like, we don't have any systems process and our sales manager's getting ready to leave, I don't know. We might have to talk about, whether we can continue forward at the agreed upon price or structure.
Yep.
Well, let's talk about the cultural side of stuff, which is huge to us. Like, for us, when we start working with a business, we know whether you're going to exit or not, it being a great place for people to come, invest their time, effort, and energy, become better human beings, contribute to the world, like that's going to come down to culture. So it's a huge thing. But how do buyers evaluate that? When we come into that situation, we're thinking about an owner who wants to give, their heart and soul to this business and to the people in it. And I think there's this perception that a lot of buyers, financial buyers, PE firms have got kind of a bad reputation. I don't matter about culture, but that's really not true. I don't think so. But tell us, how do buyers evaluate a team and the culture that's there when they've never worked there, they've never been a part of that team? How do they do that?
Yeah, one of the best ways that they're going to look at that is what is the employee retention or attrition in this company. So they're going to want to see payroll reports over the past 5 years, and are you losing employees above industry standards? So I mean, that's going to be one thing to answer the question: do we have a solid culture here, or are we stepping into potentially a toxic environment where we may see even more turnover when we buy the company because there hasn't been a level of trust built throughout the organization? But alongside that, I'll just give a quick example. Let's say that a buyer goes under LOI and starts due diligence with a firm or with a company, and they are looking at some of the initial items that they requested, and they see, hey, 70% of the sales of this company comes from this one salesperson, Tom. And so then they go back to the business owner, to the seller, and they say, hey, first, is Tom under the tent here? Or is he aware that you're selling the company? And you say, no, he's not aware I'm selling the company. And they say, well, we'd love to talk with Tom. Tom is responsible for 70% of the sales. So could you fill him in? Because we're going to need to make sure Tom sticks around, and we're going to have to put some contracts in place to make sure we don't lose him, whatever it may be. And you say, no, sorry, I'm not going to set that up. Well, that's a huge red flag. Their first thought is, we're going to lose Tom as soon as we go under LOI, and he's responsible, or as soon as we acquire this company rather, and he is responsible for 70% of the sales. So they're going to want to talk to really key employees who, if there's a guy running operations, all operations run through that person. And, maybe they're the GM, whoever it may be, director of operations, and maybe they're 63, 64 years old. And the buyer is like, well, when we buy the company, is Jack going to retire? Is he going to leave? We need to talk to Jack, and we need to figure out, have they built someone up? Do they have a potential successor for Jack that can step into that role, or will we need to go fill it, right? So there's all these questions where they're looking at management depth, they're looking for key employee reliance, and they're trying to figure out, do we have a healthy culture here? Because they want to know, when we buy this company, is the team going to stick around? Are we going to have a functional org chart that we can work with, or are we going to have to go back to the drawing board and try to fill all these seats whilst trying to grow this company that we just bought?
So let's say that the seller says, sorry, can't talk to Tom, you're going to have to figure it out. What are some of the responses you see from buyers? They're going to move forward, but what is their only recourse?
Only recourse is, well, hey, this is a big risk for us, and so in order to with this understanding, in order to move forward, we are going to have to retrade. We're going to have to revisit this valuation. And it's so funny. You think, oh, we're going under LOI for $20 million. We're going to close for $20 million. There is no guarantees of that. They could come back at any point before you close and retrade, and they can do it multiple times. So they can come back, and they could restructure as well, right? Yeah. And we won't get into the nuances there, but they could come back and they could say, hey, since you won't let us talk to Tom, we don't know if we're going to lose or keep Tom. We don't know what's going to happen there. The most we'd be willing to pay under these circumstances, $15 million. And sorry, that's it. Yeah. And you could go back and forth and negotiate with them, but at the end of the day, there's probably a couple hundred at least companies like you that they could go talk to and potentially purchase. Yeah. And you might say, well, there's multiple buyers out there, but every single buyer is going to want to talk to Tom. So.
Right. Yeah. And they might say, well, that's not a risk we're worth we're worth taking. But if you want to take that risk, that's fine. Let's take $5 million off the table. And if Tom stays for the next 2 years, you'll get your $5 million. If he doesn't, that was a risk you assumed, and
That's the restructuring.
Structure
right?
it as part of an earnout.
Yep.
Like you said. So, let's shift and talk about legal, tax, and personal readiness. What are the legal or personal issues that can create friction late in the deal?
Yeah, this just to start with the legal aspect. So this attorney that we work with, he the way he explained it to us is, hey, the number one factor for accepting a deal should be the valuation, right? And a good buyer fit. Like you should like the buyer, be comfortable with the buyer, and you should be comfortable with the valuation. But right after that should be the legal structure. The legal structure shouldn't dictate whether you do the deal or not, but it should be a really, really big factor. And so what he's saying is there's so many different legal aspects that you need to consider. And an example of that would be indemnification. So we won't get into the weeds, but if you're getting into a legal contract where, let's say, the buyer is saying, hey, we want to close fast, we really want to make this happen, we're not too worried about the risk here. Our due diligence will be super easy, super simple. However, we need you to indemnify us for everything, right? And so all of a sudden your risk exposure just went up incredibly high. So you could close, and then all these things could happen afterwards that increase that now you're exposed. And so now you're having to pay out of the proceeds back to the seller. So like that's a terrible legal deal. And that's where like you should factor that in. That's not great. However, on the other side of that token, you might get into a potential contract where they're saying, hey, we're going to make sure that our due diligence is extremely thorough. Maybe we're going to have insurance to cover this process. And so we're not going to ask you to indemnify us for really that much outside of fraud, maybe any tax exposure, and any kind of sub items that we find like that. Like we're not gonna, if we find out that, or if it turns out rather that a customer cancels a contract on us afterwards, we're not gonna come back after you. Like that's great. That's less exposure for the seller. That's a really good legal deal. And there's other aspects, but that's probably like the main one you should consider. So that's from a legal standpoint. From a personal standpoint, just to hit on that real quick, is, are you ready to sell? Because the number one reason that deals fall through, according to EPI, is seller's cold feet. Which I didn't realize that, but a seller goes to market and they get under due diligence, and then all of a sudden they're like, oh, maybe I don't want to sell, maybe I can't sell, maybe this isn't the right idea. They get cold feet and they walk away. And if the buyer starts to sense that, that's not a good sign, not a good indication, and that will create disturbance, whatever you want to call it, with the buyer just as much as what you're experiencing. So those are kind of the two, the legal and the personal. I would say, how can we make sure this is the best deal for us? You gotta factor in both.
Yeah, I've talked to potential buyers, they're in the process, and I've gotten a call and like, hey, can we have an off the record conversation? And at the time, it was more of like CPA type stuff. I wasn't representing the seller. I was more, somebody had been helping out with some of the due diligence questions. And I'll never forget this one conversation, sign company in South Florida. And they said, he's kind of gone dark on us. We're not getting answers to questions. We're actually just kind of texting him like Monday morning, hey, how you doing? How was your weekend? That kind of, because they were very, they were super friendly, but they'd also kind of become like a steward in the industry. They were buying a lot of sign companies, and they had a great reputation. And so they were nice guys. And they're like, he's not returning phone calls, whatever. And I said, maybe he's changing his mind. And you could just hear like the air come out of the balloon on the other end of the phone. I'll never forget the sound. And I said, sorry, maybe I'm wrong. And he goes, no, he goes, you're probably right. He goes, but man, we've got so much tied up in this right now, and it was talking about they've paid for all of their CPAs, they've paid for all their attorneys, they spent an extraordinary amount of their team's time sending people down there to spend days, sitting in the shop, meeting employees. Like everybody knows it's going to happen. They're at the final finish line, and turned out the guy decided he just wasn't ready. Didn't think it happened pretty fast, and he decided at the end of the day. And so realize these folks they could have $100,000, $200,000 tied up in this process, and for a buyer to be like, I'm not ready. So I mean, if it's for nothing else, just be a good human being, right? Make sure that you're ready to go through this process, because the buyers are exerting quite a bit of goodwill, and they're coming out of pocket and their own money. They're spending their own time. If you've gotten this far and you're into due diligence, everybody's kind of committed. And now we're to the point where, we just need to understand the risks here. We want to do this deal, or we would have never gotten this far. So give me kind of a closing thumbnail sketch. We've talked about due diligence. We've talked about CPAs getting involved, and we've talked about, people can imagine, okay, I email this firm that's going to do the earnings stuff. I'm going to email my financials to them. I'm going to answer some questions through email. But we've also talked about, the conversation with Tom. We need to talk to Tom. Visits down. What does due diligence actually look like? For somebody who's never been through it, how would you describe what happens? What do people experience during due diligence? What's a typical process going to feel and look like?
Yeah, the typical process is you're going to receive an initial request list. And like I mentioned, it could be 200 items. It's going to be prioritized and in sections. And it might be, hey, here's all the high priority, medium priority, low priority, which you're looking at it like, hey, if it's low priority, it should even be on here. Do I need to do this, right? But you're going to start chipping away. And as you chip away and you send over what they're requesting, inevitably, that will result in more requests. So you send that over and they say, great, our counsel looked at this and we have these follow-up questions, or now we're requesting these items. And so it almost becomes exponential, where it's like, now that request list just keeps growing, it keeps growing. And so I think that the number one factor that will help you get through due diligence, that you can start working on as a business owner tomorrow to be prepared for this, is organization. If you are organized, that process is going to be so much easier. If the buyer is saying, hey, we need every customer contract for customers over the last 3 years, and you say, no problem, that's all in our ERP or our project management system, whatever it may be. Here, you can just have our login. Go ahead, you can go grab it from there, or we'll export them, we'll send them to you. Like, so easy. But if it's, oh man, we're gonna have to find some in our email, some are in our drive, some we just don't have, some are in paper, some we're gonna have to go contact the customers and ask for them. Like, think about how long of a process that will be. So, and that's just one request, customer contract. You think about all these different requests you're gonna get. So if you can start building in that structure and organization into your company now, it is just you're gonna thank yourself so much later when you're in due diligence and they're asking for these items and you're like, great, I already have them. I'm an organized business owner. I have an organized company. So I would say that's probably one of the best pieces of advice I could give you.
Yeah, this might be kind of like out there, but years ago, maybe 10 or 15 years ago, I had a contracting business that was selling, and again, was kind of involved in helping them through some of the due diligence stuff. And it was a situation where, and this is pretty common, like they didn't want people to know ahead of time. They're kind of worried. There were only maybe 2 or 3 people besides the owner that were part of the meetings, the key people who are going to stay behind. So we do get through a bunch of the financial stuff. We're probably like halfway through, and the legal stuff has started. And they said we would love to make a trip down, which is very common, right? They're gonna, and then in this case, like in a lot of cases, they do it over a weekend, right? So
yep.
3 or 4 guys fly down, come to the shop in the morning, do the tour, go to lunch, go visit a couple job sites, kind of have a late lunch, early dinner, and then they're off to the hotel. And then the next day, I think they left. Talking to the owner, I went back the following Monday, and he goes, "Man, we should have done this a long time ago." And I'm like, "We should have sold the business a long time ago? What are you talking about?" I was like, "What do you mean?" He goes, "Look at this place. It's spotless. Like, we painted the front of the bill. It's got a new coat of paint on it. We got all the trash out of the fence line. The parking lot got weeded. All the crappy trailers, we got rid of those, and they'd spent probably 2 weeks getting ready, prettying the place up for this site visit. And it was, like you said, organization. It's like, and what the funny part is, like, everybody was happier. I'm sure the business was a lot more efficient for the next, 6 weeks before they closed the deal. Like, the warehouse guys were ecstatic. And then what's funny is they found out, obviously they made the announcement about a month and a half later, and everybody's like, "Oh, that's why you guys cleaned the place up," right? But yeah.
I mean, it's like your teenage boys, right? It's like the first time they went on a date, and all of a sudden they like shower, they put on deodorant, they were dressing nice.
Exactly.
Like, what happened?
Yeah.
What is going on?
You
here?
realize you feel
like,
better when you're doing this, right? It doesn't have to be just for the girls. This could be your new way of life. So
exactly.
that's good. Well, what closing thoughts would you have for people around due diligence and whether you're going to go through it, if it's imminent, maybe you're headed toward that process, or it's maybe something that you're like, "Oof, I thought about selling the business, but that sounds pretty grave." How would you kind of close out the series when we talk about this?
Yeah, I think it's good to go into something like this with eyes wide open and have realistic expectations. So talk with someone who's been through it. Talk with more than one person who's been through it. Hire a sell side broker, right? You might end up paying anywhere from 5 to 10%, but it's going to be worth it, because at the end of the day, like, you trying to handle everything in due diligence and grow your company, it's just incompatible. You're gonna have to choose one over the other, and the other's gonna start falling apart. So it's the hire is gonna pay for itself. And like we've been saying, just get organized. Like, start getting organized, whether you sell the company or not. You're gonna thank yourself later. So those would be my kind of top 3 recommendations. If you have a solid understanding, you know what you're walking into, it's gonna be less intimidating, I think, and you're just gonna be more prepared that, like, hey, we're probably gonna get thrown some curveballs, but we're prepared. Like, we've had the conversations. We understand what we're willing to go down to potentially. We understand what we're not willing to move forward with. We understand what we're looking for from a tax structure. Right? The more confident you are, or I said tax structure, from a legal structure, the more confident you are in all these different areas, the more options and the more power, the more control you're going to have over the situation. If you just jump into it, eyes closed, and hope for the best, you will get destroyed.
That's a great ending line for the podcast. You will get destroyed. Well, thanks, Cameron. It's been a fun series. I think it's one that we talked about doing for a long time, and it's one we've been asked to do. So thank you for putting it together. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, enjoyed it. Thanks.
So we'll have the leadership guide like we do for every podcast episode. You can download that from the show notes. You can also subscribe to the leadership guide so that it lands in your inbox every time we have a podcast released. You can also rate or review us on your podcasting app, whether it's Apple Podcasts or Spotify, or I don't know, there's a bunch of them. But that helps us out, helps us get the message out. We really want businesses to go out there and change the world, including the ones that are going to sell to buyers. We think those buyers are capable of taking that business to the next level and still having a positive impact too. So if you could help us out by spreading the word, that would be great. And we will see you next time. Thanks again, Cameron.
Thanks.